In this PowerPoint, we look at creating a mockup. So far we have done a sitemap and we have done a wireframe. The next step is to create a mockup. But before we do so, let's take a look at what a mockup is and why it's important. So what is a mockup? A mockup is a static design of a web page or an application that features many of its final design elements, but the key thing is that it is not functional. So mockup is not as polished as a live page, and sometimes it does hold some placeholder data. All right, so the key thing that I said was that it's not functional. So basically it's a static design. It is what your website, your web page would actually look like, but you can't click on it. It doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't do anything. It just shows you what that website or that web page would look like. Okay, so it's not coded in any way. And the purpose of it is to show the design layout and the design elements all together, what it would look like, okay, but not so much worrying about the functionality. So mockup does not have the functionality of a live website. Although the mockup would include a colored button, for example, it's not going to open up a form when it's clicked on, unlike a website. So it just shows you that the button looks like this, it's this color, there's this much padding, this much spacing. So it will look exactly like you would see a static website page, but except that you can't click on anything. And also a mockup may show like a cover image at the top of the page, and it's supposed to be a slider or a carousel, but it won't actually have an active carousel moving and changing pictures like it would on a live website. So the mockup is created not in the first stage of the website, but rather in, let's see, maybe in the third stage or so. As you can recall from the previous PowerPoint where we looked at the project life cycle, where we looked at information gathering, planning, and the planning stage is where the sitemap and the wireframe is created. Now we're at the design phase, and this is where the mockup is created. Okay, so again, we have information gathering. Then we have planning with the sitemap, and the wireframe is created in the planning. Then we have the design phase, and this is where the mockup is created. After the mockup is done, then we also look at content writing and assembly, putting together content, and then we take into coding, where it's HTML and CSS coding and JavaScript possibly. Then after the website has been created, developed, then we take it into review and launch and maintenance. Okay, but going back to where we are today, we are now in the design phase, which is the mockup. Okay, so in a mockup we use placeholder text, because as you can see, the content's not ready yet, so the mockup may include placeholder copy like lorem ipsum, the dummy text that we've been using, the placeholder text that we've been using so far. Or for images, we can also use placeholder images, maybe not the particular image that we want because we haven't got it from the client yet, or we haven't taken those photographs yet, but very similar image that we would use. The mockup is meant to give a really good feeling about what the web page is going to look like, but not what it's going to act like. Then what is the purpose of the mockup? It's to serve as a visual blueprint or a visual draft of what the web page is going to look like. It's created to bring life to an idea or a wireframe. In the wireframe, you've kind of like laid out, the header is going to go here, the content in the middle, footer at the bottom, and like a sidebar. So you have like a basic idea of what is going to be on your web page, and your mockup is where you kind of add the icing, where you add the colors and the what fonts you're going to use and what pictures you're going to use, all these visual elements, how they're all going to work together. This is where your mockup comes in. Okay, so basically it's meant to show you what the page is going to look like. It gives the stakeholders, so people who are invested in this website, it shows them it gives them the ability to see what the page is going to look like while making suggestions for the changes in layout, colors, and images and styles. So maybe your stakeholder, your client might say, I really don't like this font, it doesn't represent our brand, or this needs to be much brighter, bigger. Then they can actually see what you're planning on doing before you take it into the code, because it's so much easier to change it in this at this stage where everything is static and you don't have to worry about the coding and the CSS. It's so much easier to make changes at this stage when you show it to your team and you kind of all agree on what goes where and what looks like what. this is where you kind of show the team what your web page is intended to look like, and this is where the changes are made. So if you ever wonder, what a web page might look like using a different secondary color, so instead of using purple, what if you were to use a pink as a secondary color? You can test this without, changing anything in the code. You can just test this in the mockup. You can do anything that you want. You can add a header while centering an image, or move a logo to the left or the right, and then your mockup can let the team see how potential changes might look. Maybe your client will say, oh, I want the logo very, very big, and then you change it to be very big, and then they realize that by making the logo too big, everything else has to move around. It doesn't look good. So you can really use the mockup to prove a point or experiment with things without having to worry at all about code. Okay, so the mockup helps to achieve goals. A mockup should be created for, a specific purpose with a particular goal in mind. It usually provides the team a chance to see how that purpose can be achieved by using a user interface designer with a wireframe, and see how that layout can be brought to life using the brand standards and visual creativity. Really experiment with different colors and different ways to bring the brand to life. One thing that I would like to talk about here is actually how to create the mockup. You can create a mockup, professionally. Mockups are created in Adobe XD, or mockups are created with Adobe Photoshop or Adobe Illustrator. I understand that some students have, experience working with Illustrator or Photoshop. If that's the case, then you could use Photoshop or Illustrator. If you still have it, you can go ahead and use that. If you don't have Illustrator or Photoshop, or you don't you don't have any experience using it, that's okay. For the purposes of our class, for our course, and the activity that we're about to do, you can just use Microsoft Word, or you can use PowerPoint to, put a web page together, because what we're going to be designing is going to be for Saffron. It's very simple. You just have a background image. On top of it, you overlay the logo, and then the header, and then another picture and some text. So it's actually very simple. I do have a separate video for you if you would like to use PowerPoint to create your mockup. In my example, I'm creating a mockup not for Saffron, but for a different site, but the same principles apply. I just show you how to place images, how to place text, how to place a background, how to move things around, and it's actually quite simple. And of course, if you're doing it professionally, you would make it look more realistic. You would use something like Photoshop or Illustrator to make this happen. All right, so if you have any questions, let me know. Don't be intimidated by the idea of creating a mockup. It's just putting some images and text together, and and moving things around and making it look like what you think your web page should look like.